Hi everyone, my name is Sarah and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be going through some anticipated new releases for 2021, April through June. So every year there's a ton of books that come out, and every year I struggle to keep up with them. And so this year I thought I would separate them in two quarters. I would do one for January through March, April through June, July through September, October through December. Would help me keep an eye on the releases that I'm super interested in and very much anticipating. So I just kind of made a list for myself, and I'm just going to kind of quickly go through them. I'm going to go through them in order of the months they're released. So, April. We have Witches Steeped in Gold by Sian Smart, which is a sort of Jamaican-inspired fantasy where two enemies have to sort of work together to take down a sort of more common enemy. So one of them is a prisoner and one of them is the daughter of a queen, and they both are looking for some sort of revenge of their own, and they end up teaming up because it seems like the person they each want revenge on is the same person, or so I'm led to believe. I wonder if it's the queen, which I would be very excited to kind of see that play out. But even if not, this book sounds great. I have seen it on so many 2021 anticipated releases, and I cannot wait for it. Then we have Malice by Heather Walter, which is a sort of dark retelling of Sleeping Beauty, where Beauty falls in love with the evil sorceress. This is one that I'm curious about. I'm excited about, but I'm also a little curious in the sense of I feel like it could either be really good or kind of disappointing. And so I'm trying to not raise my hopes too much just yet. And I'm trying to avoid as many spoilers as possible because I don't want anyone else's reaction to sort of cloud how I feel about it or how I might feel about it. And then there are two sci-fis that also come out in April. The Last Watch by J.S. Duez. It's described as The Expanse, which is by the sci-fi series by James S.A. Corey meets Game of Thrones. And I'm very curious about this one. So what I feel like it's setting up is that there's this sort of barrier to the world that this series takes place in that is under attack or collapsing, and so they send a group of soldiers, which are basically made up of people that are not necessarily wanted or not necessarily celebrated, to go and protect the rest of the universe. I love this idea because I'm really hoping it plays into sort of a found family sort of trope, because I am a simple bisexual woman and I love a found family. So that's kind of where my hopes sort of lie in this, is that they end up becoming this like really familial sort of friendship unit, and they just go and do amazing things. That's one to keep an eye out for. And then the other one is The End of Men by Christina Sweeney-Baird, which is a sort of, it's detailing a world in which there was a plague that basically kills all men who contract it. And I'm interested in this one, even though I'm trying to steer clear of some like plague or virus related books, just because it's hitting very close to home, obviously. But the thing that's exciting me the most about this particular story is that it is sort of a collection of stories which are basically different people within this world's recollections of the world they're living in. It sounds like there will be some from before the virus hit and some that happens after, and sort of detailing the new world through the people who actually live in it in a sort of memoir type feel is what this one was kind of pitched to me as. So I'm actually very excited about this. I think this could be really interesting and really allow us to dig into the different sort of types of realities that are happening in this world, because no one reality is going to fit everyone the same way. So I'm very curious to see if that ends up playing true. And then I have two thrillers that are from April as well. One of them is Girl 11 by Amy Sutter Clarke. So this is sort of detailing a woman who has a podcast that kind of follows or tries to dig into certain cold cases that have happened in the past and maybe try to solve them or just shed some light on them. And it's through her podcast that one of the quote-unquote notorious serial killers of the past sort of starts striking again, and the cops are sort of convinced that it's just a copycat because they have believed that this person has since died, and our main character never thought that for a second. So it's this idea of her trying to solve this case at the same time while running her podcast and going up against sort of police investigations. So I'm kind of back and forth on how quickly I want to read this one, because it does sound interesting, but there are parts of it that make me a little bit worried or anxious to read this one, particularly like the subject matter. So it's one that I'm anticipating, one that I will likely read at some point. I'm just not sure how quickly I will read it. And then we have May releases, and so I have A Sorrowland by River Solomon. River Solomon is one of my favorite writers. They have created two of the best things, but my favorite, sitting right here, is An Unkindness of Ghosts. I absolutely loved this book. This was one of my favorite books that I read in 2020. It was fabulous. It was so good. It was so thought-provoking. The story and the world that they created was just so beautiful and amazing. I absolutely loved it. So I'm incredibly excited to see what River Solomon comes up with next. And so this is a sort of fantasy-esque story of our character, Vern, who is pregnant and ends up fleeing this very strict religious compound that they grew up in, and sort of tries to hide in the woods while they are being hunted. And it's through this sort of hiding in the woods situation that her body sort of transforms into something else. It seems a little bit like a metamorphosis sort of feeling for our character Vern, and I'm very, very curious about this one. I am so excited for this one. I just cannot wait. Then we have A Son of the Storm by Suyi, Davies, Okungbowa. So I just kind of wrote the like blurb for this one because I really couldn't figure out how best to summarize it. And they wrote it in a very great way. So a young scholar's ambition threatens to reshape an empire determined to retain its might in an epic tale of violent conquest, buried histories, and forbidden magic. I have been weirdly into a lot of fantasies lately where like magic is forbidden in some ways, or there's like certain types of magic that are forbidden. And so yeah, so that really intrigued me to this particular book, and I'm very excited to sort of see how it ends up playing out and how the world is built and how we kind of are introduced to the world itself. So then there's a romance of Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating by Adiba Jaigadar, which is basically Hani, one of our main characters, comes out as bisexual to her friends, and her friends feel like she can't really be bisexual because she's only dated boys and men before, which I have to read this book just for that premise alone. But in a sort of fit of panic, she kind of blurts out that she's dating Ishu, even though she's not. So her and Ishu sort of come up with a plan and a pact to pretend to date, and each of them will get something what they want, and then they sort of obviously end up falling in love throughout the process. I don't love contemporary romances, but I do love the sort of resurgence of these sort of rom-com-esque contemporary romances that are not so sort of bogged down with drama, which I just don't love reading about. So I'm very excited about this one. I feel like the premise is something that may potentially hit fairly close to home for me, but I'm very excited to read this one, and I just love it. So then we have The Hunting Wives by May Cobb, which is a thriller that is basically a woman who is recently moves to Texas with her family, is bored, and ends up joining this weird sort of secret society of like hunting wives where they get together and they shoot and they drink and they do all these different things. And it's in one of these outings that someone winds up dead, and so our character kind of gets drawn into this whole web and is kind of I don't know if she's arrested for suspicion of murder or if she's just a part of this circle, but either way it's sort of this idea of she's in too deep and can't really get out of it yet. This is one that I'm interested in. I don't know how, I don't necessarily know if I would say I'm excited about it, but I'm interested in it because I'm curious more about how it's going to be written, and if it's going to be written in a sort of non-linear way, which I think could be really interesting with this particular story. So I'm curious about this one, and I do want to give it a try. And then finally, I have a couple that are being released in June that I'm excited about. The first one is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. So this is one that's one of my most anticipated releases. And so this is a story that's inspired by the history of India, and we have one of our main characters who is a sort of captive princess who's been imprisoned by her brother who claimed the crown for himself. And then we have her maidservant who has a sort of forbidden and secret magic. They end up teaming up to try and take down the princess's traitorous brother, and obviously rescue her from being captive. This is one that I am very excited about. I have heard just so many great things about this particular book, so I am incredibly hopeful that it is going to play itself out in the way that I am hoping that it does. And then there's one that is Daughter of Sparta by Claire M. Andrews. So I've been really in a mood for kind of mythology retellings, and this is the sort of Daphne and Apollo retelling, but it is sort of more geared towards Daphne's point of view. Daphne is sort of on a Herculean-esque quest, I guess I'll say, of doing specific tasks to try to protect and save her family, and it's through this that she ends up kind of meeting Apollo, and it's sort of unclear how close to the Apollo and Daphne story this particular book is going to be. So I'm interested in it and I'm curious, but I'm going to kind of try to rein in my expectations just a little bit. Another one I have is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, which is the author of Red, White, and Royal Blue. It is a contemporary romance where our main character of August sort of falls in love with this woman named Jane on the train, and it turns out that Jane is actually from the 1970s, and so there's this weird time travel aspect to it that I really wasn't expecting. So I'm curious about how that's going to work out, and I'm cautiously optimistic about it. That's the last book that's on my list. So I don't remember how many of these are. I think I try to keep it around 15, but that's my list. So let me know in the comments below if you're excited for any of these, if maybe you've already read some of these, what your thoughts were, what other books you're hoping to read this year or anticipated releases you're waiting for. Really hoping to get to some of these, fingers crossed. But as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.